There are moments in life when fate delivers a twist so sharp it cuts through years of carefully built illusions. This was exactly the case for Nathan Caldwell, a self-made millionaire who believed he had everything figured out. Success, power, prestige, he had it all. And what better way to cement his triumph than by inviting his ex-girlfriend to his wedding, a subtle yet deliberate reminder of what she had lost. But Emma Sterling was not the broken woman he expected her to be. When she walked into the grand ballroom, she wasn't alone. By her side were 3 children, all sharing the same piercing blue eyes as Nathan himself. The carefully curated image he had crafted over the years shattered in an instant. Welcome to this extraordinary story of ambition, loss, and a reckoning that no one saw coming. Nathan's journey to wealth was not an easy one. Raised in a working-class neighborhood, he spent his childhood watching his father break his back in construction, while his mother juggled multiple jobs to keep food on the table. It was a life of struggle, one that fueled his relentless drive to escape. He vowed never to endure the same hardships, pushing himself to become the very definition of success. Academically gifted and fiercely ambitious, Nathan clawed his way into an Ivy League university, where he outworked everyone around him. Late nights, endless coffee, and an unyielding pursuit of excellence became his way of life. And in those years of grind and sacrifice, he met Emma, a free-spirited artist who saw beauty in the chaos he tried so hard to control. Their love story was unexpected, yet undeniable. Emma softened Nathan's hardened edges, reminding him that life was more than just achievements and bank balances. She was the only one who saw past the ambition-driven exterior into the man he used to be. For a while, they were inseparable. While Nathan worked tirelessly to build his startup, Emma supported him in ways money never could. She was his anchor when self-doubt crept in, the voice that kept him sane during long, sleepless nights. But success is a double-edged sword. As Nathan's business grew, so did the demands on his time. The late-night brainstorming sessions turned into boardroom meetings. The quiet moments of laughter and intimacy were replaced by networking events and deal-making. Slowly but surely, Emma became a distant afterthought in a life that no longer had space for her. She fought for their relationship, clinging to the version of Nathan who once whispered dreams of forever. But in his eyes, she had become a distraction, an obstacle to his ascent. One night, after yet another argument about their future, Emma walked away, for good. And Nathan, convinced that love was a weakness, let her go without a second thought. That was 6 years ago. Now, standing in the center of his opulent wedding venue, dressed in a custom-tailored suit worth more than what his parents made in a year, Nathan was about to learn that the past never truly stays buried. Because Emma was back, and she wasn't alone. Nathan Caldwell wasn't born into wealth. In fact, his childhood was the kind that hardened people, forcing them to either accept their circumstances or fight tooth and nail to escape. Nathan chose the latter. Growing up in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, he learned early on that life wasn't fair. His father worked construction, long hours, low pay, and a body slowly breaking under the weight of years spent in hard labor. His mother juggled shifts as a waitress and a cleaning lady, inept, stretching every dollar to keep food on the table. Nathan hated the feeling of helplessness that surrounded his family. He hated watching his parents struggle, knowing there was no safety net, no inheritance waiting for him. He swore to himself that one day he'd never have to worry about money again. That promise became his obsession. Even as a kid, Nathan worked harder than anyone around him. He excelled in school, not because he loved learning, but because he saw it as his only ticket out. While other teenagers were out partying, he was buried in textbooks, acing exams, and working part-time jobs to save every penny he could. By the time he was 17, he had mapped out his future with ruthless precision. Get into an Ivy League school, done. Land scholarships to cover tuition, done. Graduate top of his class, done. Build a business empire, in progress. Nathan didn't just attend university, he dominated it. While others struggled to balance academics and social life, he made sacrifices. Friendships? Temporary. Relationships? Unnecessary. Sleep? Overrated. That's why meeting Emma Sterling was such an anomaly. She wasn't part of his plan. Emma was everything Nathan wasn't. Artistic, carefree, and drawn to the beauty in life's imperfections. She painted the world in colors while he lived in black and white. Their paths crossed during an on-campus art exhibit where Nathan, despite himself, found her work captivating. The paintings spoke of resilience, hope, and human connection, things he had long buried beneath his ambition. She challenged him in ways no one else ever had. She made him laugh when he was too serious, reminded him to breathe when he was suffocating under pressure. For the first time in his life, Nathan allowed himself to feel something beyond the hunger for success. For a while, their love story worked. Emma grounded him when he felt lost. She was the person who celebrated his victories, comforted him through failures, and believed in him when he doubted himself. And in return, Nathan gave her stability, a promise that their future would be brighter than either of them could imagine. But dreams don't always grow in the same direction. By the time Nathan was building his first startup, his focus had shifted entirely. The long nights Emma once spent keeping him company turned into nights spent alone. The man who once listened to her talk about her art with fascination now barely acknowledged it. Slowly, she became a spectator in his life rather than a part of it. Nathan didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but he didn't care. In his mind, every hour spent away from work was an hour wasted. Every moment not invested in his empire was a moment lost. And Emma? She was just another distraction. Their love, once so strong, crumbled under the weight of his ambition. And one night, after one too many fights about where they were headed, Emma made the decision for both of them. She left. Nathan barely looked back. He convinced himself that love was just another luxury, one he couldn't afford if he wanted to be great. And so, he poured everything into his work, determined to prove to the world and to himself that success was worth every sacrifice. Years passed, and Nathan's bet on himself paid off. His startup revolutionized e-commerce, turning him into one of the youngest self-made millionaires in the country. Magazine covers featured his face. Investors scrambled to work with him. Private jets, five-star hotels, and exclusive parties became his new normal. He had everything he had ever wanted, or so he thought. Because despite all the wealth, the recognition, the power, there was still something missing. But Nathan ignored the emptiness, drowning himself in business deals and high-profile relationships that never lasted. And then came the wedding. The grandest, most extravagant event of his life. The final, undeniable proof that he had made it. He was marrying Lillian Carter, the daughter of a media mogul, a woman who looked perfect beside him in every way that mattered. And to make sure his past knew just how far he had come, he sent an invitation to Emma Sterling. It was meant to be a reminder, a declaration that he had won, that he had moved on. But Nathan had no idea that Emma was about to remind him of something far more important, because Emma wasn't coming alone. Nathan Caldwell never planned for love. He never had the time for it, never saw it as something essential to his grand vision. But love doesn't always ask for permission. It simply arrives, unannounced, and disrupts everything. That's exactly what happened when he met Emma Sterling. It was his third year at university, and by that point, Nathan had fine-tuned his life into a relentless pursuit of success. Every waking hour was spent either studying, networking, or planning his future empire. Relationships were distractions, and distractions were unacceptable. But Emma was different. He met her at an art exhibit on campus. He had been dragged there by a friend, someone who insisted he needed to experience culture instead of living in spreadsheets and business models. Nathan had fully intended to stay for 5 minutes, maybe 10, before slipping away. Then he saw her. She stood in front of a canvas, explaining her work to a group of students. Her passion was magnetic. Every word she spoke carried an energy that made people lean in, as if she were revealing some grand secret about the universe. Nathan didn't know why, but he found himself listening. Her painting was abstract but filled with warmth, bold colors that somehow made chaos look beautiful. It was the complete opposite of everything Nathan believed in. He lived by logic, by order, by predictability. But here was a woman who embraced the unpredictable, who found meaning in imperfection. Their first conversation was awkward, mostly because Nathan wasn't used to talking to people without an agenda. "You look like you hate being here," she had said with a smirk, catching him off guard. "I don't hate it," he replied. "I just don't understand it." Emma had laughed, a real, genuine laugh that somehow made him feel like less of a machine. Art isn't always meant to be understood, she told him. Sometimes it's just meant to be felt. That conversation turned into coffee, which turned into late-night walks, which turned into something neither of them had expected. Nathan and Emma were opposites in almost every way, but somehow that was what made it work. While he obsessed over plans and efficiency, she reminded him to live in the moment. While he chased perfection, she found beauty in the imperfect. For the first time in his life, Nathan wasn't just working towards something, he was experiencing it. She became his safe place. During the early days of his startup, when investors wouldn't return his calls and failure seemed inevitable, she was the one who kept him from falling apart. She listened to every idea, every frustration, every moment of doubt. She celebrated his small victories, even when no one else cared. And when he ran out of money trying to keep his dream alive, she worked extra shifts at a bookstore to help pay their rent. "I believe in you," she had told him, "even if you don't always believe in yourself." But belief alone wasn't enough to keep them together. As Nathan's company grew, so did the distance between them. At first it was subtle. A missed date here, a forgotten promise there. He was always busy, but Emma understood. She was patient. She reminded herself that he was building something important, something bigger than both of them. But then the excuses became more frequent. The late nights turned into all-nighters. The man who once looked at her like she was his entire world now barely looked at her at all. And the worst part? He didn't even notice. One night, after weeks of being treated like an afterthought, Emma finally confronted him. "Do you even remember the last time we had a real conversation?" she asked. Nathan barely glanced up from his laptop. "Emma, I have meetings, I have deadlines, can we not do this right now?" Her heart sank. She had been there from the beginning when no one believed in him. She had sacrificed for him, fought for him, loved him when he had nothing. And now, when he finally had everything, she was nothing more than an inconvenience. That night, she packed her things. Nathan didn't chase after her, and that was the moment Emma knew. He wasn't the man she had fallen in love with anymore. So she walked away, carrying a secret neither of them knew would one day change everything. At first, Emma Sterling tried to convince herself that the changes in Nathan were temporary. She told herself that the late nights, the unanswered texts, the way he barely looked at her anymore, it was all part of the process. Building a company from nothing required sacrifices. And she had always known Nathan wasn't the kind of man who settled for mediocrity. So she waited. She waited for him to come home early, to ask about her day, to hold her the way he used to. She waited for the Nathan who once spent hours talking to her about the future, who traced lazy patterns on her skin while they lay tangled in bed sheets, who made her feel like she was more than just an afterthought. But he never came back. Instead, there was this version of him. A man who saw love as a distraction. A man who measured his days in profit margins and board meetings. A man who had everything he had ever wanted, except the one thing that truly mattered. The fight started small. Emma would ask if he could take just one night off, if they could have dinner like normal couples do. "Emma, you know how important this is?" Nathan would say, barely looking up from his laptop. "I know," she'd whisper. "But am I?" That was the real question, wasn't it? Where did she fit into his life now? She had given him everything. Her support, her patience, her love. She had worked extra shifts to help cover rent when his startup was struggling, had stayed up with him during his worst nights, had believed in him before anyone else ever did. But now, it felt like she was just another thing on his list, one that kept getting pushed further and further down. Then came the night that changed everything. Nathan had come home late, again. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up, exhaustion hanging off him like a second skin. Emma was sitting at the small dining table, a plate of untouched food in front of her. She had stopped waiting up for him weeks ago, but tonight, something inside her refused to just go to bed and pretend everything was fine. "Can we talk?" she asked. Nathan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Emma, I've had a long day. Can this wait?" "No," she said, voice steady. "It really can't." For the first time in weeks, he looked at her, really looked at her. And what he saw wasn't the patient, understanding woman who had stood by his side for years. She looked tired. Not just physically, but in a way that spoke of deep, quiet heartbreak. She took a slow breath. "Do you even love me anymore?" His silence was answer enough. Nathan didn't say yes. He didn't even say no. He just stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on them both, and did nothing. Emma nodded, a sad smile ghosting across her lips. "That's what I thought." She stood up, walked past him, and disappeared into their bedroom. By the time morning came, she was gone. And Nathan? Nathan told himself he had made the right choice. Love was a distraction, and he had too much to lose. The weeks after Emma walked away from Nathan were a blur. She had left their shared apartment with nothing but a suitcase, a shattered heart, and the overwhelming certainty that she had done the right thing. Still, the pain lingered like an open wound. She had loved him, deeply, fiercely, in a way she had never loved anyone before. But love alone wasn't enough to hold together something that had already fallen apart. She moved into a small studio apartment across town, far from the world she had built with Nathan. She told herself that she would heal, that she would move on, that eventually he would become nothing more than a distant memory. But life had other plans. It started with the exhaustion. At first, she chalked it up to stress. Leaving Nathan had drained her emotionally, and adjusting to life without him took more energy than she expected. Then came the nausea. Early mornings spent hunched over the bathroom sink, the scent of coffee suddenly unbearable. She ignored the signs for as long as she could. But deep down, she already knew. The moment she saw the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, her world tilted on its axis. She stared at it, heart pounding, mind racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had never talked about kids. How could they, when Nathan barely had time for her? And now here she was, sitting alone on the cold bathroom floor, holding undeniable proof that a part of him would always be with her. Tears burned in her eyes. For a moment, she let herself imagine telling him. She pictured the way his brows would knit together in frustration, the way he'd exhale sharply, already calculating how this would derail his carefully laid out plans. She could almost hear his voice. "Emma, this isn't the right time." It would never have been the right time. That was the moment she made her decision. Nathan had already chosen his path. He had made it painfully clear that nothing, not even love, was more important to him than his success. He had built a life where she no longer belonged, and she refused to bring a child into a world where they would be seen as an inconvenience. So she walked away. She never told him. Instead, she built a life of her own. 9 months later, in a quiet hospital room, she gave birth to triplets. 3 tiny miracles with Nathan's piercing blue eyes and her own stubborn heart. She named them Liam, Everly, and Theo. And from the moment she held them in her arms, she knew she had made the right choice. It wasn't easy. There were nights when exhaustion threatened to consume her, when the weight of single motherhood pressed down on her chest like an unbearable burden. There were days when she questioned whether she could really do this alone. But she did, because no matter what, she would never let her children feel like they weren't enough. And so, she painted during the hours they slept, slowly rebuilding her career as an artist. She worked tirelessly, balancing commissions and gallery showings with diaper changes and bedtime stories. She fought for them. She sacrificed for them. She loved them with every fiber of her being. For 5 years, she never looked back. Until one day, an invitation arrived at her doorstep, one that would change everything. Nathan Caldwell was getting married. And just like that, the past she had worked so hard to leave behind came rushing back. Nathan Caldwell had convinced himself that his past didn't matter. The years after Emma left were a blur of relentless ambition, long nights, ruthless deals, and an obsession with building his empire. He didn't have time for regret. If love had been a distraction, heartbreak was just fuel for his next success. And it worked. His startup, once a risky gamble, exploded into a billion-dollar e-commerce powerhouse. Investors lined up to throw money at him. Magazine covers hailed him as the next great entrepreneur. His face became synonymous with power, wealth, and the American dream. Everything he had sacrificed, everything he had lost, it all felt worth it when he looked at his bank account. Or at least, that's what he told himself. Nathan lived in penthouses with city views, drove the kind of cars people wrote songs about, and traveled the world in private jets. But no matter how many champagne-soaked parties he attended, or how many beautiful women filled his nights, there was always something missing. Not that he ever admitted it. Instead, he embraced the image the world had created for him. He became the man people expected him to be, sharp, successful, untouchable. He cut ties with the past, deleting old contacts, replacing old memories with newer, shinier ones. And Emma Sterling? She was nothing more than a closed chapter, a name he hadn't spoken in years, until the invitation. Nathan Caldwell and Lillian Carter request the honor of your presence. His wedding was set to be the event of the year. Lillian was perfect on paper, the daughter of a media mogul, beautiful, well-connected, and just as ambitious as he was. Their union wasn't just about love. It was about power. Together, they would become a force no one could ignore. But there was one last detail Nathan wanted to add to his victory lap. He sent an invitation to Emma. He didn't expect her to show up. Hell, he wasn't even sure why he sent it. Maybe it was curiosity, or ego, or some twisted need to prove to himself that he had won, that she had made a mistake leaving him, that he had moved on. But Nathan had no idea that the woman he had once dismissed as a distraction would be walking into his wedding with 3 little reminders of the life he never knew he had. The envelope sat on Emma Sterling's kitchen table, its elegant gold lettering catching the soft glow of the afternoon light. Nathan Caldwell and Lillian Carter request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Emma stared at it, her heartbeat steady but her mind racing. For 5 years she had built a life completely separate from him. She had erased every trace of their past together, thrown herself into raising their children, and never once looked back. And now, he was inviting her to his wedding. She knew Nathan well enough to understand that this wasn't an olive branch. He hadn't sent this invitation because he missed her or because he wanted closure. No, this was about power. Nathan had spent his entire life proving himself, turning every failure into a stepping stone for his success. This invitation wasn't about reconnection. It was a victory lap, a way to show her and himself that he had won. Emma could have ignored it. She could have tossed it in the trash, carried on with her life, and never given Nathan Caldwell another second of her time. But as she glanced across the room, her eyes landed on the reason she couldn't just walk away. Liam, Everly, Theo, their 5-year-old faces so full of life, so blissfully unaware of the weight this moment carried. They had never asked about their father. She had given them enough love to keep them from feeling the absence. But absence has a way of making itself known, even in the spaces where it isn't spoken. For the first time she wondered, did they deserve to meet him? Did Nathan deserve to know them? A storm of emotions surged through her, anger, sorrow, uncertainty. She had spent years healing, making peace with the choices she had made. Walking into that wedding meant reopening wounds she had carefully stitched shut. But maybe, just maybe, it was time for Nathan to face the truth. This wasn't about revenge. She had no desire to humiliate him or ruin his perfect day. But he needed to see what he had left behind. And so, she made her decision. Emma Sterling was going to the wedding, but she wasn't going alone. The Caldwell-Carter wedding was the kind of event that made headlines. Set in an exclusive estate with sweeping views of the coastline, it had everything. Celebrity guests, imported floral arrangements, a menu curated by Michelin star chefs. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a display of power, wealth, and perfection. And at the center of it all was Nathan Caldwell, dressed in a custom tuxedo, standing tall, radiating confidence. Today was the culmination of everything he had worked for. The past was behind him. Or so he thought. The moment Emma Sterling walked through the grand entrance, time seemed to stop. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. A ripple of whispers spread through the room like wildfire. It wasn't just that she was there. It was who was with her. Standing on either side of her, holding her hands, were 3 children. 3 children with piercing blue eyes, the same shade as Nathan's. His world cracked in an instant. Nathan had spent years constructing the perfect life, carefully curating an image of success that left no room for regret. But now, staring across the room at Emma and the 3 undeniable reflections of himself, his carefully built empire suddenly felt like it was standing on unstable ground. For the first time in years, Nathan had no words. Emma, on the other hand, carried herself with quiet confidence. She wasn't here to cause a scene. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for the truth. As she stepped further into the venue, her children's eyes widened with excitement, oblivious to the tension in the air. "Mommy, is this a castle?" Liam whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Emma squeezed his hand gently. "Something like that, sweetheart." Nathan couldn't move. He couldn't think. His fiancée, Lillian Carter, noticed his frozen stance and followed his gaze. And just like that, her smile vanished. Nathan Caldwell had built a life free of complications, free of the past. But in that moment, surrounded by the weight of what he had left behind, he realized one undeniable truth. The past had just walked through the door, and it wasn't leaving anytime soon. Nathan Caldwell had spent years perfecting the art of control. Every decision he made was calculated. Every move was strategic. He had built an empire, crafted a life of luxury, and ensured that nothing, not failure, not love, not even regret, could shake him. But as he stood frozen in the center of his own wedding, staring at Emma Sterling and the 3 children who looked just like him, all of that control shattered. The whispers in the room grew louder. Guests exchanged glances, some already piecing together the obvious truth. Even the string quartet faltered, the music slipping into awkward silence. Nathan's jaw tightened. His pulse pounded in his ears. His entire body screamed at him to move, to say something, anything. But for the first time in his life, he was at a complete loss. And then Emma walked closer. Her expression was calm, but her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, held him in place like a force he couldn't escape. She stopped just a few feet away, her grip steady on the small hands of the children beside her. "Nathan?" His name on her lips sent a jolt through him, snapping him out of his stunned silence. Lillian, his bride-to-be, finally spoke. Her voice was low, sharp. "Who is she?" She already knew. Everyone knew. But she wanted him to say it. Nathan swallowed hard. He turned to Emma, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "What are you doing here?" Emma's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You invited me." His stomach twisted. He had, though he never actually expected her to come, and he definitely never expected her to bring. His gaze flicked down to the children. His children. The realization hit him like a freight train. Every feature, every detail, he couldn't deny it. The sharp angles of Liam's jawline, the piercing blue of Everly's eyes, the way Theo stood with his arms crossed like he was already trying to figure out the world. Nathan's mind raced. He did the math. 5 years. 5 years since Emma had walked away. 5 years since he had let her go without a second thought, believing that their chapter had closed forever. His throat went dry. "Emma, they deserve to know their father," she said simply. "And you deserve to know them." His breath caught. Deserve. Did he? Lillian exhaled sharply, her patience snapping. "Nathan, are you telling me these are your children?" Silence. Because what could he say? The truth was written across their faces. Emma didn't gloat. She didn't make a scene. She had no intention of humiliating him. She had simply come to give him a choice. And for the first time in his life, Nathan had no idea what to do. Nathan Caldwell had built his life on certainty. Every decision, every calculated risk, every sacrifice had led him here, to this grand moment, this meticulously planned wedding, this pinnacle of success. But now, standing frozen in front of Emma Sterling and the 3 children who looked exactly like him, everything he had built felt like it was collapsing from the inside out. The whispers among the guests turned into full conversations. Eyes darted between Nathan, Emma, the children, and his bride-to-be, Lillian Carter, whose expression had darkened with disbelief. Lillian turned to him, her voice like ice. "Tell me this isn't true, Nathan." Nathan opened his mouth, but no words came out. Emma hadn't said much. She hadn't needed to. The truth was standing right in front of him, staring up at him with wide, innocent eyes. His mind raced. 5 years. 5 years of believing Emma had walked away for good. 5 years of thinking he had left that chapter behind. 5 years of not knowing. He felt like he couldn't breathe. Emma, on the other hand, was calm. Not smug, not vengeful, just steady, like a woman who had made peace with her past but had come to make sure he faced it too. "These are your children, Nathan," she said softly, her voice carrying despite the thick tension in the room. "Liam, Everly, Theo." She said each name carefully, deliberately. They deserve to know who their father is, and you, she met his gaze without flinching, deserve to know them. The weight of her words settled over him like a crushing force. Nathan looked down at the three small faces staring up at him. Liam, sharp, serious, just like him. Everly, curious, searching, her blue eyes too familiar to ignore. Theo, arms crossed, his quiet stance mirroring Nathan's own. A painful, unshakable truth settled in his chest. These weren't just Emma's children, they were his. Lillian took a step back, her hands clenched at her sides. "You knew about this?" she hissed at him. Nathan finally found his voice. No, his throat was dry. He turned back to Emma. "You never told me." Emma's expression didn't change. Would it have mattered? His stomach twisted. Because she was right, wasn't she? 5 years ago, he had been so obsessed with success, so blinded by his ambition, that he had pushed her away without a second thought. If she had told him back then, would he have listened? Would he have cared? He didn't know. And that terrified him. The weight of his choices, their consequences, had finally caught up to him. Lillian let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "This is unbelievable." Her voice dripped with fury, with humiliation. "Do you realize what you've done, Nathan? Do you have any idea what this looks like?" Nathan's mind was spinning, his carefully controlled world coming apart at the seams. This wedding was supposed to be a celebration of his success, a declaration to the world that he had everything. But now he wasn't sure he had anything at all. The weight of the moment pressed down on Nathan like an avalanche. The whispers among the guests had turned into full-blown murmurs. Lillian stood rigid beside him, eyes burning with anger and humiliation. Emma, however, remained composed. She wasn't here for revenge. She wasn't here to ruin his wedding. She was here for the truth. And so were the 3 children, standing beside her. His children. Nathan had always believed that control was his greatest strength. But as he stood there, staring at the undeniable evidence of the past he had abandoned, he realized he had no control at all. Emma exhaled slowly, breaking the silence. "I didn't come here to humiliate you, Nathan." Her voice was steady, clear, but not soft. Nathan finally looked at her, really looked at her. She was different. Gone was the woman who used to wait up for him, who had once clung to the hope that he would make space for her in his world. She had built her own world. Without him. She lifted her chin slightly. "They deserve to know who their father is." Lillian let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is insane," she muttered under her breath before turning to Nathan. "Are you seriously going to entertain this?" Her voice was like a blade to his gut. Entertain this? His gaze flicked downward, locking on to the 3 small faces watching him. This wasn't a disruption. This wasn't some scandal to be swept under the rug. These were his children. Nathan clenched his fists at his sides, struggling to process everything. His entire life had been built on forward momentum, never looking back, never second-guessing. But now, for the first time in years, he was standing face to face with the past he had chosen to forget. Emma's voice softened, but only slightly. "I don't expect anything from you, Nathan." Lillian scoffed, arms crossed. "Oh, please. If that were true, you wouldn't be here." Emma ignored her. She kept her gaze locked on Nathan, unwavering. "But this is your moment, your choice. You can walk away right now and continue the life you've built, pretending none of this exists." Nathan felt something inside him tighten. Or Emma's expression didn't change. "You can be the man they deserve." The words landed with the force of a hammer. Nathan's heart pounded as he stared at his children. His children. For the first time in his life, success, wealth, and power didn't feel like the only things that mattered. For the first time, he wasn't sure what his next move should be. Nathan Caldwell had built his entire life on choices. Every decision he had ever made, every sacrifice, every deal, every step away from the past had led him here. To this moment, to this impossible choice. The grand ballroom, once filled with celebration, had turned into something else entirely. A reckoning. Emma stood before him, steady and unshaken. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had walked away from, was giving him the chance to make one last decision. Behind her, Liam, Everly, and Theo clung to her hands, their small faces filled with curiosity, but not yet understanding the weight of what was happening. Nathan couldn't move. He couldn't think. How had this happened? 5 years ago, he had told himself that letting Emma go was necessary, that love was a distraction, that ambition was the only thing that mattered. But now, standing here looking at the three undeniable reflections of himself, he realized the truth. He hadn't just walked away from Emma, he had walked away from them. Lillian shifted beside him, her patience wearing thin. "Nathan," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Say something." But what was there to say? Nathan turned to Emma, his voice raw. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma didn't flinch, "Because you made it clear what mattered to you. And it wasn't me. And it wasn't them." Her words cut deep because they were true. Nathan had spent years convincing himself that he had done the right thing, that leaving Emma behind was just another step toward his inevitable success, that whatever they had shared was never meant to last. But he had been so wrong. His chest tightened as he looked at the three children, his children. 5 years. 5 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, bedtime stories, all moments he had missed. And the worst part? He hadn't even known. Lillian exhaled sharply, stepping away from him. Her gaze was filled with fury, betrayal, and something close to disgust. "This is a disaster," she muttered under her breath. Then louder, "Nathan, are you even going to deny it? Or are you just going to stand there like an idiot?" Nathan barely heard her. Because nothing else mattered right now, Emma took a slow breath. "I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, Nathan." He could tell that she meant it. "I came here because they deserve to know the truth, and so do you." Silence. The room felt like it was closing in on him. Nathan could feel every set of eyes on him, waiting, watching. But only 3 of them mattered. Liam, Everly, Theo. His children, his family. Emma straightened. "This is your choice, Nathan." And that was the moment he knew. This wasn't a business deal. This wasn't a PR crisis. This wasn't something he could control. This was his life. And he had a decision to make. Nathan Caldwell had spent years believing that success was measured in wealth, power, and control. But as he stood in the middle of a ballroom filled with people who once admired him, with his fiancée storming out and his entire world unraveling, he realized none of it mattered. Because across the room, 3 small faces were watching him. Liam, Everly, Theo, his children. They weren't judging him, they weren't demanding anything, they were simply waiting for him to make a choice, for him to be the man he should have been 5 years ago. Emma had already turned to leave, her quiet dignity intact. She had given him the truth, but she hadn't begged him for anything. She never would. And for the first time, Nathan understood why. She had built a life without him. She had fought, sacrificed, and endured, raising these children on her own while he had been chasing something that suddenly felt so meaningless. His pulse pounded in his ears as he forced himself to move. "Emma, wait." She paused but didn't turn around. Nathan swallowed hard, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know how to fix this." Emma glanced at him over her shoulder, eyes unreadable. "Then don't make promises you can't keep." Her words were a test, a challenge. For once in his life, Nathan didn't respond with arrogance. He didn't deflect or make excuses. Instead, he did something he had never done before. He let himself feel the weight of his choices. He turned toward his children, kneeling down to meet them at eye level. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, voice softer than it had ever been. The triplets stared at him with quiet curiosity, sensing the shift in energy. Then Everly tilted her head. "Are you our dad?" Nathan's throat tightened. He could have lied, could have softened the truth, but instead he nodded. "Yeah, I am." The words felt foreign, unsteady, but right. Liam narrowed his eyes, thoughtful. "Then where have you been?" Nathan exhaled, the shame settling deep in his bones. "Not where I should have been." Silence. Then Theo, small, serious Theo, reached for his hand. Nathan felt his heart crack wide open. Emma watched quietly, her expression unreadable. But for the first time since she had walked into his life all those years ago, Nathan didn't see her as a reminder of the past. He saw her as the reason he still had a chance to make things right. He had lost so much. But maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost everything. For the first time in his life, Nathan Caldwell let go of control. He had spent years building walls, convincing himself that success meant leaving the past behind. But now, kneeling in front of his children, feeling Theo's small hand reach for his, he realized something powerful. The past wasn't something to be erased. It was something to be owned. Nathan closed his fingers around Theo's tiny hand. a surge of warmth spreading through him. It was so simple, yet so profound. A beginning. Liam and Everly watched him closely, waiting to see what he would do next. Nathan looked up at Emma. She had given him this chance. She could have walked away forever, could have let him live his life in ignorance. But instead, she had stood here today, facing the man who had once let her down, and given him an opportunity to make a different choice. And this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. Nathan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his past mistakes, but for the first time not running from them. "I want to know them," he said, voice steady. "If you'll let me." Emma studied him for a long moment, and in her eyes Nathan saw everything. The love they had once shared, the pain he had caused, the strength she had found on her own. But most of all, he saw hope. "You're not going to get it right overnight," she said softly. "Being a father isn't a business deal, Nathan. It's not something you can just fix with a decision." He nodded. "I know." Emma glanced down at the children, her expression softening. "But if you're serious, if you're really ready to be in their lives, then we'll figure it out." Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't lost everything. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew that. He had missed too much, and there was no way to rewrite the past. But he could show up now. He could be the man his children deserved, the man Emma had once believed in. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to become the father they needed. A small tug at his hand pulled him from his thoughts. Theo looked up at him. "Do you know how to play soccer?" Nathan felt an unexpected chuckle rise in his throat. Of all the things he expected to hear, that wasn't one of them. "I guess I'll have to learn," he said. Liam folded his arms, looking skeptical. "You're gonna have to practice a lot." Everly grinned. "I can teach you." Nathan's chest ached, not from regret but from something else, something new. A future. Emma let out a quiet laugh. "Looks like you've got some coaching ahead of you." Nathan met her gaze. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was chasing something. He had already found what mattered. And this time he wasn't letting it go. As the wedding guests disappeared, as the whispers faded, Nathan Caldwell walked away, not as the man he had been, but as the father he was finally ready to become. So we've just come to the end of this story, and if you're still here, watching, listening, reflecting, it means that in some way this story has reached you. Maybe it stirred something deep within, maybe it challenged your perspective, or maybe, just maybe, it made you pause and truly feel. Stories have a way of doing that. They remind us of the fragile nature of life, of love, of time itself. For some, this story might have awakened old wounds, the sting of betrayal, the ache of lost time, the quiet weight of regret. For others, it might have been a moment of realization, a mirror reflecting the choices we make, the relationships we nurture, and the ones we let slip away. But no matter how it spoke to you, it gave us something precious, a chance to reflect. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If you focus on freedom and live with kindness, simplicity, and integrity, you will find clarity. You will keep your mind unclouded by the noise of the world, letting go of what you cannot control, understanding the fleeting nature of material things, and focusing instead on what is eternal." Right now, inside of us, battles are being fought. Our immune systems are defending us from invisible enemies. Our hearts beat tirelessly. Our minds navigate an ocean of thoughts and emotions. And yet, how often do we stop and simply appreciate the fact that we are here? That we are alive? At a psychological level, we are facing silent wars, addiction, anxiety, depression, loneliness. At a cultural level, we see chaos, political division, unrest, economic uncertainty, environmental struggles. But at a cosmic level, the Earth keeps spinning. The universe moves in perfect harmony, untouched by our human worries. It's all about perspective. When a massive redwood tree falls in the forest, some might call it a tragedy. But in its fall, it clears the way for sunlight to reach the ground, allowing new life to grow. Everything, every loss, every heartbreak, every struggle, serves a greater purpose, even if we don't yet understand it. Confucius once said, "Everything has beauty, but not everyone sees it." Sometimes we are so caught up in chasing the next thing, the next achievement, the next goal, the next validation, that we forget to see the beauty in this moment. Marcus Aurelius deeply understood this. He saw that hardships were not punishments, but opportunities. He once asked, "Why do you see misfortune in an event, rather than fortune in your ability to endure it. Life is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to shape us. So my friend, if you've stayed with me until this very moment, I know you are someone who feels deeply, someone who understands that life isn't just about surviving. It's about learning, growing, and finding meaning in the struggles. Maybe this story was just a story, or maybe it was something more. Maybe it reminded you that pain is not the end of the story. Maybe it whispered to you that even after the storm, the sun always rises. And if this story meant something to you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because stories like this are what keep us connected, what remind us that in our struggles, we are not alone. And remember, when you put kindness into the world, the universe has a way of bringing it back to you. Trust me, because in the end, when we've lived long enough, we realize that life is really quite simple. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you, I see you, and I love you all.